All right. We have been hearing a lot about Tranq dope in the news.
Tranq dope, if you're not familiar, excuse me, has been infiltrating for quite some time, actually, the Philadelphia area, particularly Kensington, which is the open air market. So, Xylazine is a non opioid veterinary tranquilizer, not approved for human use. It acts as a central nervous system depressant and sedative in humans. And it has been linked to an increasing number of overdose deaths from being used as a cutting agent for opioids, especially fentanyl. In 2019, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention found xylazine in 5.8% of overdose deaths, but during the first 6 months of 2020, that number almost doubled to 11.4%. If that's not scary enough, the drug has also been associated with severe wounds, which spread and worsen quickly. In 2021, 91% of samples of heroin or fentanyl from Philadelphia contained xylazine, while in the state of Massachusetts in the same year, it was found in 28% of heroin and fentanyl. Further causing huge concern with this is naloxone, which is the common overdose reversal medication, does not work on xylazine overdose. But because it is often combined with other opioids, doctors do recommend trying naloxone.
So, JP, what is it that you do exactly? Just so people know.
Yeah. So I'm an addiction case manager in a major hospital in downtown Toronto. Mm-hmm. So I see patients at every stage of their journey, but mostly, well, not every stage. I see people at the stage when they've ended up in a downtown core hospital with addiction challenges, and so I work on a interprofessional team with addiction medicine providers, and we and that's what we do. So.
How long ago did you first hear about xylazine? Was it because it had service in Canada, or did you hear about what was happening down south?
I heard about it down south first, and that's where it is still the predominant problem, and it seems to be a very regionalized thing. Unlike the benzo adulterant that's been put into the fentanyl, the xylazine is a completely different and much more localized problem because it's done on the local level at the dealer level. Mm-hmm. As opposed to done as I understand it. And just full disclosure, I'm not a toxicologist. I'm not a physician. I'm not even really an expert in this field at all, I would say. But I just give some knowledge of this from working in these communities. It is a scary thing. I mean, the benzo thing is a bigger problem for all the communities that we support. And these problems are really complicated by the fact that even the whole fentanyl problem is a complicated problem, right? Because it's like it used to be we were scared of fentanyl, and now we're running towards fentanyl.
And we still are.
And we still are for good reason. But this problem just, it's got so many different sides to it because it's just a complicated thing.
Mm-hmm. It does seem that every year or every couple of years a scarier emergence happens where there is a new adulterant or something hitting the street.
Yeah.
So you sent me some stats the other day because I did ask you,
yes.
like, are we seeing this in Canada? And what did you learn?
Well, it's kind of had a couple different waves. I mean, the one thing that I did learn, which I think was kind of interesting, is that we don't really know a whole lot, right? There isn't a whole lot of testing of this. There aren't our urine drug screens don't test for this product. This has got to be something you're specifically looking for to get. So I think. And we're not even testing, as I understand, even the people that pass away, we're not testing what they died from. As sad as that is, right? Everyone's being lumped into, kind of unintentional overdose, right? And that's the kind of That's the end of that. And so we really don't know a whole lot. The Philadelphia thing has been an interesting. They've done a really deep dive into it. So those numbers, I mean, are profound, and those numbers are similar to the benzo numbers that we're seeing, right? So we're seeing, 70 odd percent now of fentanyl could have benzos in it, but we're also seeing the problem that people are now looking for the fentanyl with benzos in it, and that's why it's getting complicated. But they're looking for it because they don't want to get they don't want to get benzo sick too, right? Because if you're used to that, then having just fentanyl alone is not going to keep you well, right? It's not going to keep you feeling well, because now you need that. And there seems to be some speculation with the same thing is happening with the Tranq as well, or with the Xylazine as well. If people are, there's not a lot of information about Xylazine, in the sense of, okay, what does withdrawal look like from that, right? So we are knowing that people that are on Xylazine and fentanyl are not switching on to OAT as well, right? So they're not being able to. It's not a smooth transition to Suboxone or methadone from Xylazine. So it's not that simple path. So. And if it's not that simple path, then things get really complicated, because how do you onboard somebody onto an opiate agonist therapy if they're not able to, if they're not comfortable while they're doing it, and they're going through withdrawal from a Xylazine, essentially.
And one of the articles that I read was talking about that very same issue, and despite the severity of the wounds that people are experiencing, like, they're still too scared to go to hospital, for one, because of the stigma, and for two, the fear of the withdrawal symptoms from the Xylazine, which my understanding, and I'm also not a medical professional, nor am I on the front lines.
I'm not either. Just to throw that in there.
A friend, Sarah of Savage Sisters, who has been advocating hard since like 2010, evidently, about the emergence of this and the dangers of it.
They're down in Philly, in
she
Kensington.
is right down in Philly, right in Kensington.
Okay.
She's actually a past guest on the show, and that was before we even had heard of any of this.
Outside of the complications from the withdrawal, which my understanding is like extreme anxiety, and really bad headaches, or they're sort of the predominant complaints or concerns that have been expressed. With that being said, like, having experienced opioid withdrawal, if you look up withdrawal, it to me, it seems to really minimize the actuality of those withdrawal symptoms, and one of them being anxiety and quote unquote cold and flu-like symptoms. I used to say, if you've got the bubonic plague or something, because
like cold and flu-like symptoms, that never really deterred me. Like, I'm like, I've had lots of colds and flus. I can handle this. It's all good. Let's party.
Yeah. And then that anxiety element of it, it was crushing. Like, it wasn't just little waves of anxiety or little butterflies in your stomach. No, this like, your heart was racing. It was hard to breathe. You couldn't function, so like, I can completely understand why individuals would be very hesitant to seek out getting off of this stuff. So I think, like, for me, one of the most terrifying things that I've read about this Xylazine is the fact that, like, the wounds themselves, we're quite accustomed to hearing about IV users having abscesses and open wounds, and that, they get infected and it's bad. But from my understanding and some of my own personal experience, those wounds generally manifest at the site of injection. The wounds with Xylazine are turning up in random places on the body, and there's even been some reports of these wounds taking place even after having just snorted or smoked an opioid that's been laced with Xylazine. There isn't enough research on what the hell is going on with this stuff. And then on top of that, like, the wounds are so incredibly bad and necrotizing. So for people who may not know what that word means, like, what it appears like is that the wounds are manifesting from the inside out, And of course, they get larger and more open as that happens. And then the skin around the wound begins to die. And then, of course, infection starts to set in. But the article that I've been reading here, it's by Stat News. They talk about the fact that they went, down to ground zero and were talking to outreach people. And one of the things that they're really urging that medical practitioners be aware of is that these wounds are treatable. So, whereas there seems to be like this sort of go-to practice is let's just cut off the infection there so it doesn't spread throughout the rest of the body. What these guys are saying is that is not necessary, and let's be cautious before we take those drastic measures.
That's I mean it's a great point, but the lot and a lot of things with the folks that we support are absolutely treatable before you reach the point of amputation. But the amount of care that needs to go into making that happen is nearly astronomical, and the resources involved. So you and from both sides, right? So from a patient perspective, bringing a patient into care, you're talking about needing to make them comfortable so they don't leave, right? And that's one of our biggest challenges in hospital these days now is to keep patients in care when they need to be in care. And with some of these wounds, you're talking about. It's almost like thinking of somebody with a 3rd-degree burn and putting them into a burn unit, right? And you just think about what that's like, right? And how many weeks and weeks someone needs to be in care, and then you think about our population and what it would be like for them to commit to that type of journey, and what would you need to make them comfortable for that period of time. And there is a lot of stigma that goes into these decisions because these hospitals are businesses on both sides of the border, one way or the other. You can say they're not, but they are. We have public medicine, but there's a business element to it, and there's only so many beds and there's only so many resources, especially in Canada, for folks that are suffering like this.
So you have treated people with Tranq burns or Tranq wounds or whatever.
So this is the thing with that. I've treated people with. I've been part of the care team that has cared for patients that have wounds that are not dissimilar from those shown. But wounds, you don't know what the origin of a wound is. So a lot of them are also kind of behavior related too. Like you'll notice that all those. Most of the wounds that I saw, well, they're not site specific, but they are specific to an area where the patient can touch, right? So you'll notice they're probably not on their back. They're not, they're not as random as you would think they are. So when I say they're behavior specific, it's usually an area where somebody can touch, right? So there's some where they're picking at it, or some behavior connected to it. But Donna, you're absolutely right. We know very little about this, right? So, and even the experts in Philadelphia are only just starting to appreciate it. And I think by the time they've got it figured out, we'll probably be off of Tranq and onto something different.
Yeah. So I think another aspect that might be important for us all to address, is the why is this being found in the supply. And JP, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but my understanding is that it gives the fentanyl legs. Because people who used to use heroin have complained that the high does not last as long. And so, dealers who are not chemists are cutting this into the fentanyl to give it a more long-lasting effect, as well as to bulk the supply itself. But the problem with xylazine is, being a sedative, people are being knocked right out. So they're by the time they come to, they're now in withdrawal from the opiate. So we've got this like negative feedback loop.
Yeah. I forget what the word is, but you can rob from somebody before the foil hits the table, because by the time before the foil hits the table, they're out. You can steal anything you want from them.
Mm-hmm. And
um,
worse.
and and worse and worse and much worse.
Mm-hmm.
It's and I think it's legal. That's one of the problems,
Mm-hmm.
but also be careful. I'm always careful to fix one of those problems, because the minute you make something illegal,
Mm-hmm.
what tends to happen is it gets replaced by an analog that is unidentified and quasi legal, which is much more harmful than the substance that you're trying to stop. So
Mm-hmm. I recently saw an article where I think Congress has moved to ban, in whatever capacity, xylazine. And my knee jerk was like, whoa, be careful with that, because if you create that vacuum, what is going to be used in its place? Like, that could be 100 times worse.
yeah, it is it's a scary kind of that game of whack-a-mole comes out. And
Mm-hmm.
I think I heard one doctor's talk about it where he said, well, it's not killing anybody directly, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Yeah.
I don't know how
I,
much I would agree with that, but directly is the operative
I
word.
mean, how would they know? They don't document.
Well,
Good point.
yeah. I think it's some of the limited research that there has been, especially in Kensington. They
Mm-hmm.
have been trying to track that, and there hasn't. From my understanding, there hasn't been any direct correlation to xylazine overdose. It has certainly exasperated opioid-related overdoses, and likely because of the respiratory depressant action of an opioid, and then you compound it with a sedative. I think that's where they're finding the correlation. But that's just
Yeah.
speculation on my part.
Speculation.
And that's where the naloxone thing comes in, and that's where it gets a little controversial too, because naloxone is effective on the opiate portion, but so it's picking the person up a little bit maybe, but you could already get them out of their out of the respiratory depression part of their overdose and doing well, but they're still just unconscious,
Yeah.
but doing well. So it gets very tricky, because I think what I heard in Philadelphia is they're encouraging harm reduction workers to carry oxygenators, which is like the little thing you wear on your finger to see if your oxygen flow is doing okay. And then if so, you don't want to give someone too much, because yes, you're right, you're putting them in withdrawal. So it's such a complex, tricky problem with so many layers to it.
Mm-hmm.
But if you've ever been involved in trying to resuscitate somebody that's on benzos, right, that's the scary part. So because naloxone doesn't work, and and that's it's a very frightening part of what we do, because the person's passed away and they're done, right? And so it's hard to. I haven't been involved in a resuscitation where you've got where you're trying to ascertain which drug it is, right? Whether or not this is a xylazine impacted. But in the benzo situation, it's horrible, because once you've given somebody 3 injections of naloxone, then that's all I had with that in one particular session, and the person had already passed away, and it was we suspect it was benzo related, otherwise they would be alive.
Mm-hmm. So what are you seeing as far as Tranq in Canada? What are we seeing?
Well, I think Tranq, the first major sightings of it in the stats was, I think, in 2019. Again, it's a matter of what's being tested, and we're not testing at the source. We're not testing when somebody's passed away. So it's so hard to know what's what, right? Mm-hmm. And but from what testing they did do, even in that one result, where now they're saying 57% of expected fentanyl samples contained benzo-related drugs and or xylazine.
And where was this test?
This is from the Toronto Drug Checking Service. They just put that out last week. And as far as just xylazine, it's 10%, that they're saying 10%. So that's up from the number that I discussed earlier, which was a 6% number. I sent you a few months ago. So we're still kind of hovering on these results of single digits to 10%, right? Which is nothing like, it's the opposite of what you saw in Philadelphia. But there is one real interesting slide that it shows an inverse relationship, is that typically when the Xylazine is present, the benzos aren't present. And I thought that was really interesting. So, and as there's more benzos, there's less xylazine. As there's more xylazine, there's less benzos. And as somebody who have seen so many people pass away because of benzos that I can relate to and that I've supported, I'm almost like, okay, I got to pick between one and the other, and and if the xylazine isn't killing anyone directly, then is this really that bad of a thing? I mean, obviously, if you have some gaping wound, and it's all bad, it's all horrible. But
yeah, I just pulled up a substance drug checking blog by University of Victoria, I believe it is, and they are saying, we can see that benzos represent a majority of the adulterants detected in down samples, and that the level of benzo adulteration over time has remained fairly consistent, with around 50% of down samples containing a benzo in any given month.
They're calling it down?
They are.
Huh.
Yeah. And this study was conducted samples were checked between August 2021 and August 2022. So here they're talking about that despite the increasing prevalence of xylazine in down samples, the concentration of xylazine that we detect appears to remain relatively consistent over time. The average concentration of xylazine that we detect is around 1%, but with a wide range of 0.1% to around 35% in the highest concentration samples.
So when it's there a lot.
Apparently. That was my understanding of it as well.
Yeah. And so that's an interesting. So that ended. That was August 2022. Is that the end of that date?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay. So that's and that's sort of where I saw that number lower from about 4 or 5 months ago, and then this one was just released this week, or on March the 10th, actually. So, and so it is kind of cresting up, but it would seem like one dealer would be like one significant supplier getting onto this would be enough to to change the dynamics quite a bit. There is some speculation that there's another element to this, is that the criminality. So, and this gets a little political, but love him or hate him, one of the things that I think Trump was able to do was to really curtail the Chinese fentanyl creation. And as I understand, because they actually made they made fentanyl illegal in China, which it wasn't before. It was a legal drug. And so the speculation is that a lot of this pressure of and then China ended up making just analogs of it and allegedly sending it to Mexico, and that's how the whole thing has started to fly. But this could be a problem of when you start cutting out things that are difficult. You start making things illegal, then you end up getting the xylazine, which is legal, right? And that certainly wasn't their intended. It wasn't what they were trying to do, but there is some speculation that crackdown has had that impact. We don't have that crackdown here. There isn't a whole lot of major drug cases going down for people, selling, these kind of analogs to drugs. You don't see it a lot, right? I mean, there's a few, but it seems to be a little looser in Canada.
JP, I understand you have a podcast. Tell us about it.
Yeah, Captain Hook, the Addiction Project podcast that I do on a pretty much on a weekly basis with Dr. Wiplove Lamba, who is an addiction psychiatrist that I worked with in Toronto for a number of years, and kind of bringing addiction medicine awareness to as many people that's willing to listen to our message. The masses, hopefully, yeah.
Where can people find you?
They can find us at on YouTube under the Captain Hooked, the Addiction Project. We're on everywhere you can see your podcasts, Spotify and all those different channels.
All right, JP, thanks so much for joining us today. We'll let you
Thank
go.
you. Lots of fun. Thank you.
Take care, my friend.
Okay. Bye.